January 13th is not just another date on the calendar, and I really want you to pause for a moment and let that sink in. This is the day that's going to lay everything bare. This is the day the numbers come out that show, in black and white, just how much Social Security recipients have been shortchanged. When you finally see the real inflation figures next to that so-called 2.8% cost of living adjustment, the one that was hyped up as a win, the frustration is going to hit hard. Because once you compare those two numbers side by side, it becomes painfully obvious that what you were given doesn't even come close to what you actually needed. That increase wasn't generous. It wasn't even adequate. And the data coming out is going to prove it. I want you to understand why I care so deeply about this and why I'm spending the time to break it down in plain language. For more than a decade, I've worked closely with low-income families trying to survive within systems that were never designed to truly support them. I've sat across from single parents doing the math over and over again, trying to stretch $800 or $900 a month to cover rent, food, and childcare, knowing the numbers just don't add up. I've helped disabled veterans read through benefit letters that feel deliberately confusing. I've listened to seniors tell me, with tears in their eyes, that they're skipping meals so they can afford their prescriptions. And year after year, I've watched the same cycle repeat. A COLA gets announced, there's a brief moment of relief or celebration, and then reality sets in when grocery prices jump, utility bills rise, and that raise disappears before the month is even over. That's not a coincidence, and it's not okay. What's happening around January 13th matters because this is when we get the final inflation data for 2025, specifically the December Consumer Price Index report. The CPI is the government's official way of measuring inflation, and December completes the full picture of what prices actually did over the entire year. Once that report is released, there's no more guessing and no more partial data. We'll be able to see exactly how high inflation really ran throughout 2025. And when you line that up against the 2.8% increase Social Security recipients received, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. Over the past several months, inflation hasn't been quietly fading away. It's been creeping higher, and in many categories, it's been stubbornly persistent. Essentials like food, housing, utilities, insurance, and healthcare continue to take bigger bites out of fixed incomes. And while 2026 is already shaping up to bring even more cost pressure, this December report is crucial because it tells the full story of 2025. It shows us definitively how much ground Social Security recipients lost over the year. This isn't about fear or speculation. It's about numbers, and those numbers don't lie. This affects a massive group of people, and I want everyone listening to understand that if you receive any kind of Social Security benefit, this applies to you. Retirees relying on monthly Social Security checks feel it. People receiving SSDI or SSI feel it. Surviving spouses and children depending on survivor benefits feel it. Veterans who receive Social Security alongside VA benefits feel it. We're talking about roughly 72 million Americans who were told to be thankful for a 2.8% increase while their real-world expenses rose far faster. Rent increases of 8 to 12%. Grocery bills climbing month after month. Higher utility costs. Higher Medicare Part B premiums, higher out-of-pocket medical costs. These aren't luxuries, these are survival expenses. When I think about this, I think about people, not percentages. I think about the grandmother who worked for 4 decades and now lives on around $400 a month, trying to stretch every dollar while prices keep rising. I think about disabled parents raising children on a fixed income with no room for error. I think about veterans managing chronic pain and service-connected injuries while watching every expense like a hawk. These are not people asking for handouts. These are people asking for fairness. Here's where the frustration really boils over, and this is where the math tells the story clearly. A 2.8% COLA sounds reasonable until you compare it to real inflation, not just official headlines, but what people are actually paying in their daily lives. When you look at food, housing, energy, and healthcare costs combined, real inflation for many households has been running closer to 5% to 8%. That means your income went up less than half of what your expenses did. You're not staying even. You're losing ground every single month. What makes this even harder to accept is how that COLA was calculated in the first place. That 2.8% increase wasn't based on current prices. It was based on inflation data from July, August, and September of 2024. Think about that for a second. Data that's over a year old was used to decide how much money you'd need to live on in 2026. By the time that increase shows up in your January check, the information behind it is 15 to 18 months out of date. Prices have changed. Your needs have changed. But the formula hasn't. Let's put real numbers to this so it's not abstract. If you're receiving the average Social Security retirement benefit of roughly $1,900 to $2,000 per month, a 2.8% increase gives you about $50 to $55 more. Then Medicare Part B premiums rise by around $10 or more, immediately cutting into that increase. Suddenly, your real gain is closer to $40. But if your actual living cost went up by 5%, you needed closer to $95 just to break even. That gap doesn't disappear. It compounds month after month. December inflation data is especially important because the end of the year tends to be one of the most inflation-heavy periods. Holiday shopping, increased travel, higher demand for goods and services all push prices upward. That's basic economics. When demand spikes, prices follow. So when the December CPI numbers are released, there's a very real chance they will show higher inflation than earlier months, making the inadequacy of that 2.8% COLA even more obvious. The Social Security Administration has used this same COLA calculation method since 1975, nearly half a century of relying on a backward-looking formula while the economy moves faster and faster, and then policymakers act surprised when seniors and disabled Americans struggle to keep up. You may hear officials talk about inflation being temporary or about one-time price adjustments, but lived experience tells a different story. Prices haven't come back down. They've stayed high, and in many cases, they've continued to rise. Supply chain issues, tariffs, housing shortages, healthcare costs, and energy prices are all still weighing heavily on household budgets. So when you're told that inflation is under control or that a 2.8% increase is enough, I want you to trust what you see with your own eyes. The grocery receipt, the rent notice, the utility bill. You're not imagining this. You're not failing at budgeting. The system simply isn't keeping up with reality. Even though it's discouraging, understanding how the COLA system works gives you some power. The formula compares the average CPI from July through September of one year to the same months the year before. That number becomes the COLA for the following year. By the time you receive it, it's based on economic conditions from long ago. Will this system change? Maybe one day. But right now, we have to operate within the reality we're in. There are steps you can take to protect yourself as much as possible. Start by tracking your real expenses. Write them down. Food, rent, utilities, medications, transportation. When you see the numbers clearly, you can better understand where the gaps are and what kind of assistance you may need. Next, make sure you're applying for every benefit you qualify for. Programs like SNAP, energy assistance, Medicare savings programs, and prescription